Palingenesis by Simon Harewood. Book 3, Heart of the Sear. Chapter 4, A Hovel in the Marshlands. Away they raced, sailing over the low grass and withered shrub. Bruin gripped the boy round the chest with his left arm and held onto the reins with his free hand. The supplies he had left behind was close at hand behind a low ridge. The men had given up the chase by the time he reached it. He smiled to himself as he leaped down to secure the provisions. What an advantage the animal gave him! Suddenly there was time to think and plan. He would not turn to make for the pass as yet, but first convince those attempting to follow that he had approached from another direction. They would soon give up the pursuit in the darkness and wait for daylight to track him. Before then he would have to be in a secure hiding place. His first instinct had been to run all the way to the pass in safety, but the limp figure slouched on the horse was hardly drawing breath. If he did not halt and tend to Gareth, all he would achieve was to steal away his body for his burning in Fenvale. The deserted peat shack he had passed on his way in came to mind. He could stop there for a few hours and see to the boy's condition before continuing. It would not be easy finding it in the dark, though, especially if he tried to locate it from a different direction. As the night wore on, he slowed his mount to a walk, meandering this way and that among the shallow pools and rivulets of the bog. The fellows in Lakeside might bring out dogs to track him if they possessed such. If he had to remain in the hovel for a while, it would be best to lose them here. Clouds were moving in again from the north. There was a dampness in the air, an expectation of rain. A good downpour would certainly help confuse any pursuit. There were hardly any landmarks in the flat, swampy field. Already the eastern sky was growing pale. Dawn was not far off. The first heavy drops began to fall. He might be forced to make a camp of sorts among the shrubs. This was a frightful prospect, considering the possibility of pursuit and the boy's deteriorating condition. He halted the horse on a little knoll to look about him. A small figure broke cover close by. It was a Vadran, probably the one who was supposed to meet the horse.
Prince Rune?
Yes, friend. You come from the pass?
Aye, for the horse.
He looked a little uncertain. The huge animal was intimidating. Rune pointed towards the north.
You passed an old hovel on the way here.
The Vadran nodded.
Aye, that I did. It is not half a mile distant.
He smiled.
I see you have the princeling. He is alive?
He is, but I need to find shelter. We might have to hole up there for a day or two.
The little man agreed.
Aye, he seems unfit to be moved about.
He glanced back in the direction of Fenvale.
I will return the horse and come back with others to keep watch for you.
Rune dismounted and reached out a hand to this unexpected ally.
That will be most welcome.
By the time they reached the hovel, it was raining steadily. This was certainly a disadvantage to possible pursuers. Yet the aid of the Vadran would be invaluable in staying concealed in Terrallon. If that old Tour priest could discover him in Lakeside, perhaps he could sniff him out in the marshes also. In the dim light of early morning they inspected the place. There was a dry corner close to the hearth, paved with rushes and a mound of swamp grass. With a little work he would be able to keep out the weather and make it quite habitable. Fuel could prove to be a problem, especially with the rain soaking everything outside. The Vadran saw him properly installed before setting off for the pass. They dragged in whatever firewood they could find, restored a larger portion of the roof, and covered the windows. Rune was sad to see the horse go. He owed the animal such a debt as to make him promise quietly to find him all the sugar in Fenvale as soon as they met up in Shervan once more. The day seemed to grow darker as he stepped inside the hovel. The drumming of the rain on the rush roof increased in intensity, cascading away into the brush lining the outer walls. He was bone-weary, he realized, aching and drained, in need of a good rest himself. With all the close calls and violent confrontations he had seen this night, it was amazing that he had sustained so little injury. His goal had been reached. It was still not quite real. His bedroll was spread out on the dry rushes next to the hearth. They had placed Gareth on it. He looked down at the unmoving body of the child. He was lying so still. Was there yet a pulse? Had all the jostling of their ride killed him? With trembling fingers he smoothed back the pale hair and felt the boy's forehead. It was cold to the touch, lifeless. Quickly he lowered his cheek to the slightly open mouth. Was that a stirring of breath he felt? He glanced down at the chest. Surely there was movement there. Or did he imagine it? Fear gripped his heart. He pulled away the cloak. There were no signs of life. He shook his head silently. It could not be true.
Gareth.
He leaned closer to speak in the boy's ear.
Gareth, I did not know. I dared not hope.
He would not be heard, the rain said. Never again. Rune tried to gather his thoughts, but sadness and regret would so overwhelm reason, till words were small and meaningless. His voice grew hoarse with it, and his breathing came in gasps.
Even if you are not mine, I won't let you go, not now. Live. Live for me, and for the sake of your poor mother who could not know you, and who had no chance to love you.
Too late, the hissing rain replied. Your pleas cannot be heard. The eyes remained shut, the body motionless. Then the tears came, spilling over from the well of grief inside him.
Aethera, I have now destroyed everything we had together. All our moments I have tainted. The warmth of your love deliberately twisted. Even now this, the evidence of our union, is no more. I have done this. Here now are the wages of my treachery.
He placed his palms on the cold, clammy skin of the boy's chest. He was trembling, begging, praying to the unknown author of life. It had to come from somewhere, even in its borrowed form. Life. If he could impart life, if he could let vigor and warmth flow from his being. But he could not. He could only deal death and destruction. His touch was fear and despair, the violence of a beast, thoughtless and cruel. These hands that had spilled so much blood, yes, even exulted in it, had no real power, could not restore anything. Slowly, his body slumped forward till his forehead rested on his hands. The rain roared about him now, a funeral shroud for the heart he had betrayed. How long he remained thus he was not aware, whether an hour or two, but the cry inside him abated not, and the grief would not let him rise from where he was kneeling. The purpose he had hoped to find had been extinguished. Then, in time with his breathing, he felt a faint stir in the chest beneath his fingers. The pulse, the slight whisper of life, remained there, like the dying embers of a fire. Rune held his breath. Yes, there was no mistake. Hope surged through him. Somewhere his pleas had to have been accepted. And here, still glowing faintly in this cold little body, was all that was left in Myrtle of his dream. How precious the opportunity to protect it. He would have to risk a fire, even with his watchers not in position yet. The heavy rain would mask the smoke. Gareth needed warmth and sustenance. He would not lose any more time. It was no easy task starting the fire with damp kindling and wet fuel. He smiled to remember how easily this boy had conjured fire from the soaked logs in Fenvale. Some of that art would be appreciated now. Flames finally leaped from the smoky hearth, and he felt the welcome warmth filling the room. The sound of the dancing rain retreated. He turned to the boy. Gareth did not appear to be injured other than round his neck, where the strange metal collar had been fitted. Rune removed the ragged shirt, his eyes drawn to the boy's back. Blood trickled slowly from the wicked band down his spine. His body was cold as that of a corpse. He caught himself checking again for a pulse. The rustling in the wet brush outside interrupted his examination. Could the vagrant have returned? A loud banging on the door filled the space. Rune laid down the boy carefully and drew the blade. If this was just a Marshlander passing by, it would not be his day of good fortune. He strode over to the door and yanked it open. The stranger stood there, frowning impatiently. It was an old man dressed in rags and apparently harmless. His mane of white hair was neatly combed and tied. The fellow did not wait for a challenge or introduction, but merely asked, as if already in the middle of a conversation.
You have taken off the collar.
Rune stared at him, speechless. Ignoring the blade, the old man stepped inside, out of the persisting drizzle. Rune found his voice.
Who are you?
My name is Janos.
There was a hint of pride as he said it. There was something strange in the air, like the meddling of the old sorcerer of Inra.
Garth sent you.
The man raised an eyebrow.
Who is Carr?
Kale, the summoner.
Kale. Why do you call him a summoner?
Rune looked at the old fellow in complete astonishment.
You are not aware of the summoning?
Janos shrugged.
There are a great many things I'm not aware of, but I know you have the boy here.
He pressed forward to where Gareth was lying in front of the fire. Rune took a step to cut him off.
Yes, it seems you do. But how, I wonder? Whence do you know Gareth?
I knew the moment you brought him out. I owe him my life, and more than that, my sanity. I am here in partial payment of that debt.
He pointed a finger in Gareth's direction.
How do I know him? If it were not for this boy's art, I would be lost below Nunmerik still, and a very dangerous place it has become. But we can discuss these matters while making preparations. You have something for boiling water?
Janos moved to the hearth where he knelt before the fire. Opening his bag, he brought out several jars and small bags of what appeared to be herbs. He glanced back at Rune over his shoulder.
Would you oblige me with some water over the fire?
Rune moved to fetch his cooking pot. The man had to be a healer of some sort. Yet, despite his claims, he was not inclined to trust him. Before he would allow him to touch the boy, he would need to be satisfied. There were several issues that needed clarification. He filled a pot from his water skin and hooked it to the hearth iron. Janos was crushing herbs in a small mortar. Rune decided that his actions were genuine. He knew what he was doing. Direct questions might set his mind at ease.
How did you know we were here? I have only just arrived.
Janos did not look up from his task.
When you are touched by the art, like this child, I will find you like a blazing beacon in the night. Perhaps only if he wanted to hide from me would I fail to locate his exact position. I have my own skills, you see, even if I have not the gifts of a child of fear.
Rune shook his head.
It seems more and more that I am at a disadvantage without it.
Janos looked at him in dismay.
Why are you without art?
All Nurians, Viron, have forsaken it.
Forsaken it? For what? What will you do without your art?
Rune considered him for a few moments.
If you do not know about the summoning, you will not understand about the forsaking of the art. Let's just say we were tricked into it.
Janos looked at him in an odd way.
Tricked by the one who tricked me, no doubt. The scoundrel of Lakeside.
You were in Lakeside since before the summoning.
How long?
That would be more than 600 cycles.
600!
Janos stared at him in awe.
Gods of Myro! He has taken 600 cycles from me.
Rune was convinced of the truth of what was said, incredible though it seemed. Faint memories stirred of childhood pranks, the discovery of old writings, and searching for prohibited knowledge in old bell roots.
You are one of the 10.
Janos smiled at him.
Of what used to be the 10. Just an old fool now, homeless, duped, and ill-used. A wanderer.
He straightened up to sprinkle crushed leaves into the warming water.
Malik the liar. I have to thank for that. He had me chase my own memories for all this time, down among the crypts of his rotting city, till your Gareth came and found them for me.
He sat back, shaking his head.
I cannot begin to tell you my gratitude.
Suddenly he clapped his hands together.
Let us not waste any more time. That collar has to come off, or he will not breathe much longer. It is a miracle that he has lasted this long. Just a child.
They moved over to where the boy lay stretched out. Rune had lost his misgivings about the strange old man. All his instincts urged him to trust Janos. He certainly valued the skills and knowledge of another in this situation. Carefully, they dragged Gareth into a sitting position, propping him up against a makeshift pillow formed from the dry grass over which Rune had spread his cloak. Firelight fell on the collar. It was of a grayish hue, glistening like polished steel, but it was not fashioned of metal as he had believed. The texture was smooth as glass, a crystal band. The contraption was hinged at the back, on both sides, one for each crystal arm. How it caused the flow of blood he could not determine. He turned the boy on his side. Where the collar touched his skin, a bruise had formed, completely encircling his neck and throat. It was an unhealthy, smoky green in color. Rune touched the smooth band. An odd, warm pain spread through his fingers. It was a thing utterly evil. Under the boy's chin, a metal pin locked the arms in their deadly embrace. This would have to be removed first. Janos turned back to rummage in his bag.
You will need these, I think.
He held out what looked like a jeweler's awl and a small hammer. Rune took the tools from him, his fingers shaking a little. It was strange how loath he was to touch the collar again. The old man noticed his hesitation.
I will hold it for you.
Janos gripped the collar with a rag, his other hand holding the unconscious boy's head tightly. Rune wedged the stick of firewood under the joint to absorb the shock. He placed the awl carefully on the metal pin and struck it with the hammer. 2 blows were sufficient for dislodging it. Slowly, Janos turned back first one arm and then the other.
Take his head.
Rune knelt over the reclining form. He brought Gareth's body towards him till the boy's head rested on his shoulder. Here he secured it with a hand, gripping tightly. The collar remained fastened to the neck, inches away from his face. He could feel the sickly warmth of it.
It is some type of inhibitor.
Janos nodded without replying. His fingers held the collar. They were perfectly still. With a quick, steady pull, he drew the object away from the boy's neck. A small spike, perhaps half an inch in length, appeared as he did so. The collar came free, leaving a trickle of blood, oozing from a dark bruise like the bite of a serpent. Rune cringed at the sight of it. What they have done to you, Gareth, he thought, and that on my account.
Hold him like that for a moment.
Janos reached back for clean rags and a small gird. A dark, greasy paste was transferred from the latter to a small square of cloth. The concoction was pressed down firmly on the bleeding wound and fastened in place with a long strip.
Let him lie down.
Something like a sigh escaped the boy as Rune let him slip back onto the pillow. It was an encouraging sound for one who had hardly enough breath to stir a cobweb. Janos was bustling about, stirring his herbal mixture with one hand while still holding the collar at arm's length with the other. When he was satisfied with the steaming pot, he held up the abomination and rolled his eyes at Rune.
I better take this and go drop it in the sea somewhere.
Rune's curiosity was pricked.
What is it made from?
Janos shuddered.
I don't know, but judging by the effect it has on anyone endowed with the art, it is a product of Malik's most twisted dabbling, maybe taken from one of his many monsters. I have not the skill to destroy it, and so it must be hidden in some forsaken place, where it may never be discovered again.
He wrapped the vile object in the rag and tucked it into his bag. The pot was removed from the open flame and some of its contents poured into a wooden bowl. Janos set this aside to cool, all the while giving instructions.
Keep him dry and warm, and get this into him while it is still hot.
He indicated the bowl. Next he pointed to the mortar and its contents.
Put these in warm water. Leave it alone for at least an hour. Let him drink as much as he can hold down. Keep adding water and more of the herbs. It is difficult to swallow if it is too strong. Take care that he doesn't choke.
Rune marveled.
You have experience in these matters.
Janos stared at him in indignation.
I would think so. This is my profession, after all.
I meant no disrespect. Quite the contrary.
An infectious smile spread over the old man's face. His eyes narrowed.
You seem about ready for some of this too.
He tapped the bowl with a long finger.
It might do you good. Had some trouble in getting him out, did you?
A little, but I was fortunate in many ways.
Fortune favors the bold. You have done a great deed here, worthy of your legacy. I do not know your name, though I sense some connection with this child.
Rune smiled at him. Some connection indeed. He was relieved to know the whole truth concerning that.
I am Rune Seth Alberad of Nuria, of Iran, and this child is my son.
Even simply speaking the words warmed him. The old man's reaction astonished him. Janos' eyes grew large and his jaw dropped. He leaned forward and gripped Rune's hands.
You are the man of the lament. Imran's light. I knew I had missed something. Here is the child, and you are the one to turn around for him.
He laughed out loud.
No wonder they locked him away in the dark. But it was supreme folly to let you slip away from Lakeside.
Rune stared at him in puzzlement. He had little idea to what the man was referring.
No one is more grateful for that folly than I am. The underground of Nunmerik is a place where one will not be allowed to die a simple death.
Janos sat back. His face wore a grimace of pain.
That is the truth.
Rune brought him back to the business in hand.
How long do we stay here? Is it not better to make for the pass?
They glanced at Gareth. He was shivering lightly. Janos pulled the blanket over him.
He is dehydrated and feverish. It is better not to move him. You have food enough?
Perhaps 3 or 4 days' worth. I did not plan to remain here.
Well, if you run short, you can always scavenge round here. There are many edibles in the swamp.
A strange gleam entered his eyes.
The marsh rats are large and make a good meal, a very good meal.
Rune was a little less than enthusiastic.
The rats.
Yes.
Janos' gaze seemed to have strayed to something only visible to him. Momentarily, he collected himself and turned back to Rune.
I will bring supplies soon,
You are leaving.
before nightfall. But I will return to watch for you. There won't be a minion of Malek's to get close to this place.
He smiled slyly.
As I said, I have my own skills, and quite some time to make up for.
Rune realized how famished and worn out he was once the strange visitor had departed. He emptied the pot into a gourd and started preparing his dinner. It was good just to sit in front of the crackling fire, out of the rain and out of danger. A decent meal and a good night's rest would set him to rights again. He fed the boy some of Janos' brew from time to time. Gareth swallowed weakly but did not open his eyes. The little color had returned to his cheeks, though he was shivering violently, and the dry cough shook his frame ever so often. In silence he ate his meal, thinking over the events of the night. He had used the word fortunate to Janos in describing these, but it was much more providential than that. No amount of luck, augmented by skill and boldness, could have brought him through the pits of Nunmerik alive, could have preserved Gareth's life in that place long enough to be found, and delivered them both to this place of safety. He put the knotty stump in the fire to burn through the cold night. He was not one to believe in prophecies and portents, but too many coincidences were making a mockery of possible outcomes. By the time he had placed his head on the grassy pillow and was holding the shaking and fevered body of his son, Rune was convinced that the power he had often cursed and mocked had preserved him for an as yet unfulfilled purpose. Evrain cast a concerned eye towards the east. The wind was freshening, bringing with it a bank of dark cloud. The seas had risen, rolling their large vessel like a cork. It was time to break off the pursuit. The Aranite battle fleet, now comprising of 8 vessels, together with the 5 supplied by their allies, were in the process of destroying what remained of the Amul forces fleeing southwards after the disaster of Aran Rock. The barbarian rowers were worn out, but had scattered to prevent the enemy from taking them all in one swoop. Thus they had been able to keep ahead of the pursuers for several days. Evrain did not relish the task of forcing the surrender of these wretches. His decks were crowded with huddling warriors, many of whom were looking for any opportunity to cause mischief. Those canoes that did not surrender were simply rammed and sunk, tossing their occupants into the sea. This was not the type of action that appealed to him. Though the enemy host had to be destroyed in detail and could not be allowed an opportunity to regroup, this relentless sinking of their craft seemed particularly brutal. It was with relief, therefore, that he witnessed the worsening conditions. They were but 5 miles off Kiel and would make for that port to escape the coming storm. Not many enemy vessels would make it back to their Southland homes if they kept to the sea during a gale. Their best hope would be to row for Heron Inrath and join what remained of their forces there. It would not be difficult to trap and starve them into yielding on that island. Ranald and the strongest men from Aran were marching down the coast, mopping up bands of the Giri or Amul that had fled the battlefields in the north. There would be no refuge to be found anywhere on the coast of Aran if they were to attempt a landing. It was a strange homecoming for him once they sailed into the embrace of the Bay of Kiel. The town itself was deserted, the people having been removed inland out of danger. There had been no battle here, no looting as far as he could tell. His house stood untouched, if empty, on the shore. Slowly they beat their way into the wind, passing the head of the bull, Lemoen, driving ahead into its long shadow. The outer harbor wall beckoned, the wind abated in the lee of the mountain. Lur approached.
Do we leave them on board?
He jerked a thumb back in the direction of the crowded Amul.
Yes, we lock them up and place them under heavy guard. Then we can sleep without concern in our beds tonight.
Our own beds.
Lur nodded, smiling.
What a thought. Never imagined we would come back here and the place untouched like this. We owe Lord Karth a great debt. Without warning, this whole thing could easily have gone the other way. Did you ever see a sight as we saw at the rock? I must admit it was a fearsome one. All those bodies swarming about to do us harm.
Evrain remembered it all too well. It had taken all his resolve and courage to sail into that bay among the multitudes of war canoes. If Aran had not been prepared, the land would be desolate now, overrun by the Southland hordes, the people slaughtered or taken for slaves. Among them would have been his wife and daughter. Yes, they owed the old man from the Witch Isle a great debt. He looked at the approaching line of surf breaking on the sandy shore. Lur's words broke through his reverie.
It's strange, but I can hardly sail into this bay without thinking of the Nurian boy. I see him everywhere, on the harbor wall, in the shallows, over by the slipway. Sometimes I can swear he's with us on deck.
Evrain smiled in reply.
Yes, I think of him too.
Do you suppose he is with Lord Karth still? You suppose he's doing well?
I hope it is so, yes. He was traveling with his uncle, the exile from Nuria, a strange, angry man I'm not inclined to trust. I did fear for Gareth when he left Aaron in the company of that one. But then there is a magic about that child that can overcome great adversity.
Lur slapped him on the back, smiling broadly.
That we know too well, don't we?
He drew his cloak about him against the gusting wind.
Let's get below and gather our things. It's a cheerful supper on shore for us tonight.
Arran Rock was an anthill of activity. The greater part of the town across the bay had been sacked by the invaders and was not fit for habitation. The inner structures of the fortress itself had been severely damaged by fire. In the worsening weather, it was a daunting task to find appropriate shelter for the thousands of Aranite wounded. Captain Raelf, left in command of the fortress, had his hands full. The smoldering wall of canoes outside had to be demolished. The bodies of the enemy fallen had to be taken out by boat beyond the shore currents and committed to the sea. The Aranite dead had to be carted inland for burial. Earl Wayne of Linvale and his 2,000 men had to be billeted in the ruins of the town. Supplies had to be carted in for the thousands of captives and soldiers alike. And a discreet watch had to be kept on the strange old man from Heron Inrath. Ally or no, sorcerers could never be trusted. Garth was amazed by the clumsy efforts of the Aranite commander to keep an eye on him. After all that had transpired, after fighting side by side, there was still distrust. It could not be remedied, and he did not expect it to be, yet the situation was so predictable as to be ludicrous. He stayed on board his one remaining vessel rather than tax the very limited resources on shore. The other vessels of his fleet were aiding the sea captain of Arran in destroying the escaped Amul forces. The greater part of these forces had accompanied these. Hanik and Tyro, with perhaps 200 others, remained with him. The wounded had been given a place in the docks and were treated well by their hosts. This, at least, was a victory for good relations and trust. There was a knock on his cabin door. Hanik entered when bidden. His eager tone indicated strong concern.
Any tidings from the south?
Garth sighed deeply. If anything, he was more concerned than his captain. No, not yet.
Shouldn't you?
No, I will wait to hear from them. If you want to know, Gareth is still alive, and that is cause for good cheer. It is next to impossible to get him out of Lakeside, and I fear Rune will sell his life in the attempt, which is a disaster for our cause, as you know.
You should have let me go in instead.
Don't misunderstand me, Anik. I love the boy as well as you do, but I fear he can be brought back by one man only. That is not solely for his sake, but also for the one who has to perform it. Anik nodded.
An atonement.
Garth smiled at him. You understand more than one would surmise.
There's one thing I do not understand. What is our purpose in lingering here?
It is simply this. We need to gain Aaron as an ally of Nuria. I will have to convince Ranald to march his tired soldiers to the aid of his former enemy, either through the Portal Vale or through the pass.
The king is still in the south, dealing with the remnants of the invading force. Any war council will have to wait till he returns.
I will have to wait for him then. There is much for him to do. The rebellion in the north has to be quelled, the siege of Ross Farron broken. There can be no venturing beyond his own land when matters still hang in the balance.
How much time do we have?
Garth looked troubled. Malik believes himself secured. Perhaps he will delay long enough for us to gather what aid we can. Once he moves from Lakeside, it will all be over within a season. Pray that he lingers there till King Ranald returns. awoke to complete silence. His mind struggled at first to determine where he was. Slowly, the truth of his situation unfolded again, and a wild exultation rose up in him. The dull threat of the dream world vanished. Gareth was asleep next to him. The shivering had disappeared. Outside there was the song of birds, and the fresh smell of the rain-soaked soil seeped in through the roof rushes. The fire had subsided to a warm red glow. It was enough, for once, simply to enjoy the present, without regret or fierce hope. He reached back and placed his hands under his head. Soon he drifted off once more. When he opened his eyes again, he found the boy staring at him. The gaze was clear and calculating, fever-free.
It's you.
The voice was little more than a croak, like the crushing of a dry leaf. He raised his eyebrows in mock exasperation.
What a thing to say.
There was a slight smile round the boy's lips.
Those were the first words you ever spoke to me.
Rin pretended to think back.
I don't remember.
The smile faded.
I won't forget.
For a moment they were back on Karth's Isle, in the deep shade of a shallow gorge, beside the cascading water. What a place it had been, filled with unspoken truth and strong suspicion, the ghost of Fengor like an insurmountable wall between them. How ignorant he had been then, Rune thought, how blind.
I think I know what you are talking about.
He sat up, shoving away the blanket.
You hungry?
Gareth's eyes widened.
I will eat everything you have.
He whispered.
First, you need to finish this bowl of cold witch's brew, especially concocted for dungeon survivors.
What is it?
Oh, just some liquid you need to pour into yourself, so I can see whether it will leak out the back of your head.
Rune was immediately sorry he had made the jest. The boy's face contorted with fear. His hands went up to his throat, exploring the strip of cloth, tentatively reaching round to the back. When his fingers could not find the hateful collar, he turned to stare at Rune uncertainly.
You took it off. It is gone.
The man merely nodded, overcome. Gareth leaned back on the pillow, tears spilling from his eyes. He shut them tightly, while a shudder passed through his body. Rune knelt next to him, holding the bowl.
Here, drink this, and don't talk any more if it pains you.
The boy obeyed, making a face after he had drained the remaining potion from the bowl. Rune busied himself with tending the fire and preparing grid cakes for their breakfast. He purposely did not speak to the boy, since it seemed the latter had difficulty in uttering even a few words together. By the time the meal was ready, however, Gareth was fast asleep once more. He decided not to wake him. This would give him an opportunity to prepare more of Janos' herb medicine. Gareth woke again in the late afternoon. At once he knew where he was. The rain was drumming on the roof, and the fire crackled merrily. In the comfortable half-dark he sighed with contentment. The collar was no longer strangling the life out of him. Though the memory of it could still make him tremble, and the cold fingers had left their mark, the touch of death had retreated. Close by, right next to him, was the even breathing of the sleeping man who had done this for him. It was almost too good to be true. He reached out a hand, careful not to wake him, just to make sure he was not dreaming. No, there was no doubt. It really was Rune lying there. Gareth enjoyed the quick pulse of exhilaration passing through him. The breathing stopped, and the questioning face was turned towards him.
You want something?
As if in reply, his stomach rumbled loudly. The man laughed softly.
Missed your breakfast, did you?
Gareth tried to sit up.
I've missed many more than one, I think.
Rune helped him. Even this little effort seemed to weaken the boy.
Stay where you are. I'll get you what you want.
Gareth pointed to the pile of supplies.
The water skin first.
His voice was still very hoarse, but stronger than before. Rune watched in astonishment as he upended the skin and gulped down the liquid.
If you fill your stomach with water, there won't be any room for your dinner.
The boy lowered the skin and sighed in satisfaction.
Oh, I won't sleep again till I've had some of those.
He indicated the cold cakes next to the hearth.
We'll eat better than that tonight.
Soon enough, the room was filled with the smell of the steaming broth, thick with vegetables and sliced sausage. While he worked, Rune kept glancing at Gareth. He had a difficult confession to make. It turned out that he was not to be the one to make a start. Gareth lay back on the grassy pillow, staring at the flames in the hearth. He seemed mesmerized by the little leaping sprites, so joyful and lively in their dance. A cough shook his body. He made an attempt to clear his throat.
I'm sorry that you had to come all this way. I was so stupid in Mundor.
Rune looked up from his stirring, perplexed.
Stupid. You were the one who was stupid in Mundor.
No, I mean it. I was in such a hurry to get back, I walked right into them. I knew you would be angry.
Angry.
Rune held up the spoon and pointed it at the boy.
Stop. Just stop talking for a moment.
He turned around to face Gareth.
If it wasn't for my unbelievable stupidity and blindness, you would not have been taken in the first place. You would not have been dragged down here to this pit of fiends and locked away in the dark to die. Now, I want to tell you how I regret that. I am so terribly sorry that I caused you this harm, and I thank whoever gave me this opportunity to undo the damage I have done. That you did not die down there with those things I said to you as your last memory of me.
Gareth had reddened a little, but made no reply.
I regret what I said. I regret the way I treated you. The harsh words, the anger, much of what I said was not directed at you. I don't know how to explain it. Perhaps it was my battle with the past, if you can understand that.
He placed 2 bowls and a stone in front of the hearth. Giving the pot a final stir, he turned his head back to the boy.
Why didn't you leave with Tyro and Millen? You would have been safe with Karth.
Gareth looked up at him, his eyes large and bright with the reflection of the fire. He remembered the sadness of that night in Mundor, the decision he had made waiting in the dark alley. He tried to order his thoughts. When at length he spoke, his voice betrayed the deep emotion of that awful time.
I never regarded what you said. I knew you were upset and in pain, but I didn't know what to do to help you. I hated that place and what it was doing to you, and I couldn't just leave you.
His eyes were staring now beyond the mud walls to darker, desperate days and the hopeless struggle against bitterness and hurt. Tears ran down unheeded over his cheeks.
I wanted to help you. There was no one else, no one to take your part. I wanted to be with you, and that you would know you were not alone.
Rune sat back on his haunches, shaking his head.
You are a jewel, Gareth. I've never met anyone like you. Perhaps with one exception, your mother. I'm just so sorry that lingering there has caused you this much pain. I found your note in the Swan. I wish you could know how that tortured me.
The boy smiled through his tears.
I wanted to fetch that back before you found it. I thought you would be too drunk to notice it.
Rune continued.
Even then I did not know that you were taken. I only suspected the truth when I found this.
He reached inside his shirt and pulled out a medallion on a string.
In the inner courtyard.
Gareth gasped at the sight of it.
My coin! Oh, it wasn't lost. You had it all the time.
I did, but I almost tossed it into the sea. It reminded me of you and your dedication to that Aeronite captain. It drove me crazy.
Crazy enough to come all this way? Where did you come from? I want to know everything.
Rune suddenly remembered the pot and swore under his breath.
Now, look what all the talking is worth. You'll have me burn our supper.
Quickly, he unhooked the handle and placed the pot next to the waiting bowls.
I'll tell you all about it while we eat.
Gareth listened with rapt attention. He could picture Rune's advance into Malik's lair vividly, the demise of Gobran and even the mighty Emus. It was incredible that the horrors of that dark place had been overcome, and were no more. What had been so substantial and real for what felt much more than the 10 days of his confinement had been irrevocably altered. Someone had come to brush away the threats and nightmares, the fear and despair. He wanted to ask so many questions. How Queen Elena had not prevented his escape, whether Rune had carried him all the way to the hovel, if he could see the Vadran bow Peric had sent him. But with the second bowl of broth in him, his eyelids grew heavy and his tongue heavier still. All the answers would have to wait till morning, and there was still the big secret that remained, that perhaps now that the dreams had come true, he could reveal at long last. The boy was visibly stronger in the early morning. He fidgeted around a great deal with the water skin and raided their bag of supplies before crawling shivering back to the blanket. Rune listened to him crunching on the old bread before drifting off to sleep again.
Like a rat, he thought, one of Jaina's swamp rats.
A ray of light falling in through the makeshift roof woke him an hour later. He prodded the boy with his foot.
Are you awake?
A little.
I have a problem with you.
What is it?
The sleepy voice sounded concerned.
You haven't said that you forgive me.
Gareth opened his eyes to stare at him in shock and dismay.
But of course I do.
He looked so pained that Rune had to reassure him.
I thought so, but I just wanted to be sure. It is a terrible thing that I've done to you. To me, it's not just something to be taken for granted.
The boy sat up and gripped his hand. His expression was so serious and solemn that Rune was quite startled. Slowly and deliberately, like an incantation, he pronounced the words.
I do forgive you.
Even as he heard the words and sensed the sincerity and truth behind them, Rune realized that there was much more to this pardon than the betrayal in Munborg or the resentment and rejection of the recent past required. Gareth knew the truth. Perhaps he had known it for some time. This was his father who had abandoned him and his mother, and condemned them to misery and hate, the suspicion and eventual malice of Fengor. This was the man he had tried to find in the king who had spurned his affection repeatedly and ultimately betrayed his absolute trust. He placed a hand on the boy's head. There was nothing he could say, no repentance strong enough to be measured against such devotion and generosity. The eyes were fixed on him. The eyes of Karth's courtyard, understanding, expecting, compelling, driving back the guilt, the memories of the dark, wasted cycles. Gareth sensed something of the new awareness that had come to Rune. Slowly, he leaned forward to rest his cheek on the man's chest. The arm did not push him away, but went around his shoulders instead, gripping him tightly. Beneath his ear, he felt the beating of that changed heart that had opened to him at last. Now, he thought, now he should spill the secret, for there was no more reason to keep it to himself. But what would he think? Would it diminish the hard-won acceptance, the bitter-sweet joy he had longed to find? Would the bond that now existed be weakened by a sense of duty? He would not say a word. He would not spoil this moment of unconditional trust by making more demands, by dragging up the ghosts from yesterday they were still trying to dispel. It was enough to know the acceptance was real as the arm around him, and to relish the sensation he had imagined perhaps 100 times.
Are you going to let me get up and prepare something?
Rune's voice sounded loud and strange so close to his ear.
Perchance. This is much more comfortable than the hard floor.
Imran's beard!
Rune gently shoved him away and sat up.
Back on the floor you go, and let me get your medicine.
He moved over to the hearth to stoke the fire back into life. The bowl with cold herb water was still full. He passed it to Gareth, who took a sip and grimaced. The potion had an even worse taste when it was cold. The boy sniffed at it and stirred it reluctantly with a finger, all the while watching Rune mix the flour and oil. He was hungry again, even after eating the leftovers that morning. Various items were scattered over the floor of their dwelling. Rune's blade was leaning against the wall next to the bed. His pack, probably containing clothes and such, was propped up next to that, spilling some of its contents onto the hearthstones. On the far side of the fire were 2 bags with supplies and a mysterious bundle that had to be the one from Fenvale. He glanced back to where Rune was cooking their breakfast.
What has happened to my clothes?
You mean the ones you crawled around the sewers in? The shirt I boiled for rags, the rest is over there.
He pointed to the far corner.
You tore up my shirt.
It was dirty and smelled of the cells.
Dobran came every so often to pour out a bucket of cold water on me. It was quite clean afterwards.
Quite clean, eh? Well, he must have forgotten to do it the last few days. Gobran, that's the one outside the door. I had to kill him, but I don't regret it. He wanted to go down and slit your throat.
He was a filthy thief. He stole my doublet, and I thought he would take the medal, but you had it all the time.
His fingers went up to his neck where the medal had been. They lingered on the bandage.
He also stole my belt, and my boots.
Rune was highly amused by this outburst.
Good thing I brought you another pair then.
He winked.
I have new clothes in that pack from Fenvale. We thought they might have you chained up naked in the dungeon with the rats gnawing on you.
Gareth's eyes widened, and his expression changed so radically that Rune grew concerned.
It was a jest, that's all. What's the matter?
The boy turned his large eyes on him and spoke solemnly.
I don't want to see another rat as long as I live.
Rune smiled.
Ah, so they were gnawing on you. Strange you don't like them. Your friend seemed overly fond of them. Overly fond.
Gareth stared at him in amazement.
Janos? Where did you meet Janos?
He was here.
In this house?
In this hovel, yes. Without him, I don't know how I would have removed that thing from your neck. And that stinky stuff that you've been living on was made by him. I might have poisoned you with one of my concoctions.
Will he come back?
I think so. We are running low. But the way you are chattering, we might not need any more of it.
Gareth looked thoughtful. His fingers were playing with the loose ties at the neck of his shirt. He was about to say something more when a violent cough left him gasping for breath. Rune dragged the grid off the coals to prevent the cakes from burning and went to kneel down next to the boy.
Try not to talk so much. Drink this.
He held out the bowl again, and Gareth accepted it reluctantly. The mixture had something of Karth's touch about it, and seemed to suppress the dizziness left after the removal of the collar. The taste was bitter, though, much like the amaryllis herb of Nuria.
Drink it up, and you can have something to eat. I have some honey for the cakes.
After his substantial meal, Gareth refused to go back to sleep until he was allowed to examine Peric's bow. Nor would he be satisfied with a description or a promise to receive it the following morning. It was a magnificent weapon, every bit as fine as Beor's, if not finer. Gareth ran his fingers over the smooth stave, lingering over the pearl or black and gold inlays. The balance seemed perfect. A light, sturdy weapon just taller than he was. Rune would not allow him to draw it or even fit the string, despite his begging. Any exertion on his part could cause bleeding and discomfort. Only when Gareth understood that such an action could delay his recovery did he desist. During the afternoon the boy ran a fever once more, causing Rune some concern, for he could not account for its return. He resolved to keep him quiet and not allow any clambering about till Janos returned. The last of the crushed herbs went into the pot. Perhaps it would be sufficient for breaking the fever again. Rune sat with his back to the wall, watching the boy shivering under the blanket. He had a good fire going, and the place was warm enough, but still Gareth's teeth were chattering and his limbs were shaking. His forehead was hot to the touch, though, and clammy with perspiration. Rune did not know whether he ought to warm him or cool him down. In the end he decided to bathe the boy's forehead with a wet rag. This seemed to have a soothing effect, for the shivering stopped after a while and the body relaxed in a deep slumber. Rune leaned back against the grass mound and closed his eyes. He listened to the regular breathing next to him, the bird calls outside, the low song of the fire. A great satisfaction washed over him. This was right, he thought. This place, this sense of completeness, delivered to him at last the peace he had hunted since leaving Belruth and Nuria behind all those cycles before. The hate and bitterness were leaking out of him, fading with his memories of those dark seasons of helpless fury. He had not lost all that Fengor had tried to wrest from him. In his mind again he saw the dream, the old worn man that was his brother. Again he heard the tired voice.
I took her, but she was never mine.
No, she had never belonged to Fengor, and here was the proof of it asleep next to him. Even his brother's attempts to destroy this child had been thwarted. Rune felt the warmth of it spread through him like a tonic. Ethera was his, and her child was tied to him with bonds stronger even than the blood flowing in his veins. What was the hollow title in the soil of that far place to him? He was rich and favored beyond his poor brother. How the fellow's schemes had miscarried. How he must have gnashed his teeth at the thought of it. Rune could laugh about it now, the lies and trickery, the small malice and envy. Yet a growing sense of pity knocked on the door of his exultation. Where was the king now? Was he walled up somewhere, looking down on the hordes he had not the power to break? That would be the ultimate humiliation for the proud ruler of Nuria. Was he already broken, wounded perhaps, his mighty forces scattered and overrun? For a while he saw the slow waving fields of his home, the sun-tide breeze gently fanning green boughs and the bowing tall grass. An ache started in him for the sights of his childhood, the places and people he had drowned out in desperation. The weariness of his recent ordeal, of the long loneliness of so many futile days stole over him. The little mud house in the swamps of Terrallen was his refuge now, the place where his heart and mind could find rest. He let the drowsiness overtake him. Gareth seemed to be asleep still when he woke. He shifted his stiff limbs and sighed deeply. It was time to prepare their supper. He sat up and placed a hand on the boy's brow. There was no sign of the fever of earlier. Gareth opened his eyes. Rune's quick smile was returned immediately. He pulled back his hand.
No dreams?
The boy shook his head. When he spoke, Rune noticed that his voice had regained much of its former tone.
You are different now.
Gareth gave him that odd look again.
When you touch me, I can feel it.
Immediately his eyes filled with regret.
I'm sorry. I know you don't like...
Rune held up a hand to stop him.
I don't mind it now.
You don't?
The boy's expression showed such intense delight that he had to laugh out loud. It was easy to admit his folly.
I know now that the art is not what the priests made it out to be. I know that it is part of who we are, our protection and our expression, and we have been robbed of it by the deceiver of Lakeside and our own stupidity. It is just a pity that I've been cheated out of it, that it has passed me by.
But it hasn't. All you need is to embrace it, and it will come alive, like it has for me. I want to tell you something that I couldn't tell you before. I want to tell you some of my dream, some of what I saw when I touched the stone in the Temple of Belruth. I saw you, and I saw you wanting to turn back when I called you, and it was like now when all of the lands are burning with war. You wanted to turn, but I did not know if you would. Don't you see? It has come true. It is happening now.
Rune held up the hand again.
Slow down. You're going to talk yourself into another fever. I'm glad if your dream is coming true, and I will tell you this much in return. If I am part of yours, you are certainly part of mine. And not just the kind that shows portents and such. You are what I wanted. What I want. You and your mother. That is my dream. And because you are alive, my dream lives also, and I with it.
The boy seemed frozen with shock. His mouth was open as if he wanted to speak, but there were no words to be found. Perhaps he had not heard correctly or misunderstood what had come to his ears. Could it be possible for a man to change this much in so short a time? But he felt the touch, the essence of thought, the awareness of kinship. A hand fluttered unnoticed to his throat. Rune was a little embarrassed. Perhaps he had said too much. He certainly had not intended saying it. He would give the boy a few moments to compose himself. He rose to his feet.
I need to take a look around outside. I'll fill up the water skin at the same time.
Gareth noticed the hand at his throat and lowered it in irritation. Words spilled out of him.
Do you mean it? Is it true? You want me?
Rune sat down again on his haunches. Perhaps a little of the cruelty and hurtful spite could be undone after all.
I came back for you, didn't I? Doesn't that mean more than all the fool things I said to you?
He held out his hand.
There, take it. See if I'm sincere or not.
Gareth gripped the hand with both his, holding on a little too tightly, as if it might slip away. His pleading gaze met the man's eyes. Rune decided to end all the secrets then and there. As he spoke, he felt the trembling in the boy's fingers and appreciated at once the enormity of complete trust.
In the underground, I overheard some fellows. They were saying that you are not my nephew, but my son. That you are not Fingor's.
He paused, watching for a reaction. Gareth seemed tense, but did not change his expression. He continued.
I believe that what they said is the truth. My heart told me it was so, maybe long before we went to Munborg. But was not, in the habit of listening to my heart anymore.
A shudder passed through the boy. Rune sincerely hoped that he was not going to burst into tears. He placed his other hand on Gareth's head.
Do you think that this could be true?
I know this is true. I knew. I always wanted to tell you.
The boy swallowed hard.
I wanted to, but I couldn't.
Rune sensed something of the long struggle, the indecision and chasm of uncertainty.
Why couldn't you tell me?
I wanted to see who you were, who you are, and...
You didn't like what you saw. I can't blame you. I'd become the exile they had intended me to be, a heartless demon.
Rune spat out the word in distaste.
How long have you known?
Since I saw you first, in the courtyard.
The memory of it was painfully sharp. The whispers from the past, the sense of destiny unfolding.
On Heron Inrath. Since you saw me in Karth's courtyard.
Rune was thunderstruck.
Who told you?
Gareth made no more effort to hide his tears now.
I saw you many times, crossing the courtyard before, many times. I knew then that you were supposed to be my father, but you were cold and cruel, and I feared the day that we would meet, that you would surely.
The voice was pleading now, only a whisper. He could no longer look at the man.
Would cast you off.
Rune gently ran his fingers through the boy's tousled hair.
And I did, didn't I, boy?
He freed his hand from the clinging grasp and reached down for the bowl.
Drink this, and let me go fetch the water.
His voice was heavy now, tired.
Close your eyes and let the herbs do their work.
He slowly rose up from his knee and turned to go.
Lord Rune.
The unfamiliar address made him turn around.
You came back for me. Before you knew.
Gareth's eyes were bright, fierce gold orbs.
Yes, before.
The sudden call of the Dale Sparrow almost drowned the soft reply, and the last rays of the westering sun masked any expression on the man's face. He spun on his heel and walked out a little too swiftly. There was not much talk during supper, as if all the solemn words of earlier had to be digested first. Gareth kept glancing at Rune, smiling happily to himself. The man shook his head at the silly behavior, but was strangely pleased by it. After the meal, Rune changed the dressing on the neck wound, anointing it with a generous amount of Janos ointment. He was relieved to see a change in the coloring around it. Some of the bruising had disappeared. Gareth winced when he pressed a new dressing onto it, though. It had to cause him serious discomfort still. Having slept the greater part of the day, the boy was not in the least drowsy. This he announced as soon as Rune instructed him to lie down and sleep. He had questions, he said, and since there was little else to do for amusement, they could have a proper conversation. Rune stared at him apprehensively.
And what would you consider a proper conversation?
Oh, one where you answer all the questions and don't run off or tell me to be quiet until I have no more.
Ah, I see. So you would have to consider, since I am your father, that you owe me obedience and respect.
Gareth chuckled.
I'm not very good at that.
There we are definitely alike.
We are alike in other ways too.
Like what?
Your eyes. Mine are similar. I saw them in the mirror pool, and I have never seen others like that. Fingor did not have them, neither did my mother.
Rune stared down at the boy, who stared back at him. A little of that odd sensation he had felt so long ago when Qarth's courtyard swept over him again. The eyes were like his, yes. He was amazed that he had never noticed it before. The blue disk of color held tiny flecks of gold, like stars in an early evening sky. He picked up the bowl of herb potion. It was empty except for a few leafy remains.
I am afraid we are out of medicine for you.
I am delighted to hear that.
Rune waved a finger at him.
You are an obstinate and horrible little boy.
Gareth clapped his hands.
More things we have in common.
You little... If you weren't half dead already, I would make you regret it.
I'm glad you told me. I will take full advantage of it.
Just wait. I will keep an account of all your impertinence. The day may come when you will have to settle it.
How easy it was, Rune thought. How simple to jest and be comfortable in conversation with this child, even when he had such cause for recrimination and bitterness. It was almost difficult to believe that he could have fathered such a son. He, who had wallowed in self-pity and resentment for so long.
Oh, you won't send me away. We will tell you the truth if you do.
You think that will be your punishment? You won't get off that easily.
You won't send me away? Then I don't care what you do to me, as long as I can stay close to you.
Rune knew he meant it. Had he not endured all the insult and injury, the slurs and small spite, during the missions they performed for Qarth? Imran's breath. That was why the old meddler had paired them off like that. He had known all along. He had hoped Rune would stumble onto the truth and be converted to an ally. The old trickster. His secret weapon, his greatest argument, was this child. That's why he had thrown him into harm's way, had entrusted him to the ruthless exile. What faith he must have in Gareth. Yet the gamble had paid off. But what great contribution did the old man expect him to make that would justify the taking of such a terrible risk?
It must have been difficult for you, staying close to me all these seasons. I could not have been the best traveling companion.
Oh, it is just fine now. You smell of wood smoke and herbs. In the inn, it was very different. All that wine. Sometimes I had to hold my nose.
He laughed weakly. Soon he was coughing again. Rune shook his head. This boy did not seem to have the ability to hold a grudge.
That's what you get for all your jesting. It will take twice as long for you to get well. It may well be past Genesis before we can leave this place behind.
Gareth was suddenly curious.
Where are we? Where is this place?
We're not 15 miles to the north of Lakeside, still well within the marshes of Tiralan.
Gareth's body stiffened.
Won't they look for us? Won't they find us here?
Rune shrugged.
I covered my tracks quite well. The Vadran from the pass will arrive no later than tomorrow, I think. They will keep an eye out for any search party from Lakeside, and Janos promised to keep watch. I suspect he is at it already. Besides, since they have not located us yet, I don't think they will. Perhaps they are not even looking.
The boy seemed satisfied with this.
Then we can go to Fenvale and meet up with Kale.
Fenvale is not the place you remember. It has been flooded, and the swarmlings are already crowding in. I would like to go further than Fenvale and get out of this whole mess.
Gareth turned to him, his voice betraying his concern.
We can't leave Nuria. They will be destroyed.
Why not leave? What has that place ever given you but trouble and hurt? They tore us apart. We should have been together. They killed your mother. We should have been a family. Let it burn. They did not want you or me or your mother. They have sown the harvest they are about to reap.
Rune spoke with more conviction than he felt. The recriminations seemed oddly outdated, as if the sentiments that had engendered them were no longer valid. Gareth picked up the slight hesitation and was encouraged.
It was the king who sowed it, and the questers. There are men in Viron different from them. Would you abandon them? If you turned around only for me, and not for them also, why are you still restless here?
You think I'm restless?
I know it.
We are not safe in this place.
The fire had burned down to glowing embers. Gareth turned towards him, reaching out.
Give me your hand.
The boy gripped his fingers tightly. He smiled slyly.
You cannot lie to me when I touch you.
The smile faded. In place of it, the sad stare was fixed on the man's eyes.
You care for them still, is it not so?
Rune sighed heavily, but did not turn away.
They do not deserve your pity, Gareth, nor mine. Is it right that we aid those who have hated and hunted us?
But there are others. There are good people too, and they will all die. Euban and Din and Kale will try to face that beast and will be killed also.
Kale will try that.
That's what it was all about. He needs to make things right.
Rune shook his head silently.
There's no way to atone for the summoning.
Even as he said it, he knew it was not true. He had been given an opportunity to atone for his blind betrayal. Why would it be different for Kale? Gareth persisted.
They are worth helping. They have been lied to, deceived. They're not as bad as you make them.
Rune was incredulous. After all that had been done to him.
You really believe that? You would throw yourself into the way of harm to help them?
He shook his head.
You are a far better person than I.
That is not even true.
Oh?
You threw yourself into the way of harm for the son of your despicable brother.
That's not the same thing.
How is it different? And there's more.
He released Rune's hand and clasped his own hands together. His gaze dropped down to his interlocked fingers.
I hated him too. I hoped also that he would die, even when I still believed him to be my father. And Talon, and Lucane.
Rune tried not to sound sarcastic.
My, you have quite a list. Would you like to hear who I had on mine?
The boy seemed not to hear him. His voice took on a strange quality, as if he was horrified by what he was uttering.
And I hated her too. I did not want to, but she cast me out. All my life she would not speak to me, and I believed she despised me.
He smiled weakly.
Much more than you ever did.
Rune kept silent. He knew that there was more to come. The boy's voice continued in a whisper.
But I was wrong. She did love me, and she was so afraid. I didn't know.
He swallowed.
I would do anything to go back there and help her.
For a while neither of them spoke. Rune knew there was truth in what the boy had said. He, too, had misjudged Aethera, her motives, her sacrifice. Perhaps he was misjudging the situation now, and it was frightening how much damage that former error had caused. Now that he was confronted with it, the guilt was suffocating.
Do you hate me, Gareth?
What?
The boy turned shocked eyes on him.
No!
Not even a little?
Didn't you read my note? I thought you said that you had.
I did, and I still have it, but you wrote that before they dragged you off to the pit. Was it really terrible? I mean, in that place, did they hurt you?
He felt the boy shrug next to him.
Not so much. I'm very brave, you know, and I don't hate you, not even a little.
You will never trust me, though.
What do you mean? You came back for me. You left Munborg and the beautiful Galia.
He waved an arm in mock obeisance.
I am serious.
There was a pause. Then the boy's solemn voice spoke out of the dark.
I have always trusted you, even when you didn't want me. I couldn't help it. Not just because of the dream. You may think I'm silly or a fool, but I don't want to live in a world where I cannot trust you.
Rune was silent for a few moments, as if he was considering this.
Yes, you are a silly little fool. I warned you, even then. I was crazed and capable of anything. I could have fed you to the pigs in Munborg.
Gareth caught the jesting tone in his voice and raised up in mock horror.
Fed me to the pigs? The way you were acting there, you could just have eaten me yourself.
No, thank you. Such a stubborn brat as you would certainly have been sinewy and tough. I like to dine well.
As you did at the witch's table.
Rub it in now. It did not take me long to discern what she was up to.
How did you ever find out? Were you sober long enough?
Ruin reached over and pinched the boy's arm hard till he complained loudly. Enough was enough, even if he deserved it.
That's sufficient impertinence from you. Judge what you know or hold your peace. I've never seen you so much as sniff at a glass of wine. What do you know of the comforts it can bring?
Gareth rubbed his bruised arm. He was about to speak his mind, but thought the better of it.
That really hurt.
I'm delighted to hear it. Now you may put a guard on your sharp tongue.
There was a pause. Ruin believed the insolent boy chastised for once, till he felt an elbow prodding him.
Well, are you going to tell me how you discovered it?
Oh, yes.
He cleared his throat.
You remember that tavern in Munborg? What was it called again? Squatting Hog?
Gareth laughed until a fit of coughing shook him.
That dancing pig!
He chuckled, gasping for breath.
Yes, that's the one. Though I believe my appellation more fitting, especially when it comes to the smell of the place.
I agree on that. Though the scented air in the Swan made me more sick than anything the pig could produce.
Rightly so. It was when we first received her note in the pig that I suspected that something was wrong.
The perfumed one?
He nodded, smiling.
That's it. She must have believed me a great fool to walk into a trap so meekly. But I was playing along, half out of spite to myself, or Carth, or you. Willingly duped, you can say. Which is worse in a way. It was like I wanted to be caught in her nets. So I believed her lies and ignored your protests, till it became too ridiculous to bear. I caught her with a young man, after she attempted to entice me.
Gareth laughed.
She had a lover.
Yes, and she could not wait till I had been secured before dusting him off and putting him back into service. Perhaps I was a little slow for her liking.
Gareth could not resist.
Or a little too drunk.
Ruin pressed his hands to his temples in mock exasperation.
Will I never hear the end of it?
Well, it saved you from that clinging trollop in the end, though you can hardly take credit.
Do you really think that if she had paid more attention to me that I would have stayed there?
He shuddered.
The feast was turning stale. The people of Munborg are as perverse and debauched as can be imagined. It was like wading through the slops of a hog pen.
Gareth chuckled.
The squatting hog.
Exactly. I suddenly had enough of all the painted-up refuse. I needed to clear my mind. So I tricked her and slipped out the back, found a boat and put to sea. It was there on the water where the wind deserted me and all the ghosts crowded in to torment me. You were one of those ghosts, the one to whom I owed a great debt, and I had to make a decision.
I was a ghost.
Ruin nodded.
I believed you to be dead. It was only when Cale asked me to meet him up north that I discovered you were alive still.
You spoke to Cale? In your mind?
The boy sounded incredulous. Ruin smiled at his surprise.
I was that desolate that I did not even care whether it was sorcery or not.
It is not sorcery. It is the art.
Fine, the art. I used the art. Happy?
I was just saying.
Ruin felt it necessary to take preventative measures.
And that doesn't mean I approve of these invasions of my mind. Use your tongue if you want to talk to me.
There was a disappointed silence. Ruin continued.
Cale told me where you were, and I made my decision. I promised myself that if I found you and brought you out, I would do anything in my power to make it up to you.
He turned to face the boy.
You can ask me anything. I mean it.
Gareth looked up at him.
You mean like a gift?
If you want, or a request. You have a right to my protection and to my love as my son, but I offer you more than that.
I don't want any more than that.
Gareth did not understand the desperate need for atonement hidden behind these words. He considered the offer for a few moments.
Perhaps there is something.
What do you want?
I want a naming day feast. I already have a list of people to invite, and the food that should be on the tables. Just exactly who should sit where. You see, mine passed by while I was in the dungeons.
Ruin realized it was not a jest.
By the stone. Is that all?
And I want you to tell me all about my mother, and why she would not look at me until the day she had decided to die.
Gareth.
You said,
I know.
Rune brought his hands up to his face.
I owe it to you. We both do.
Now he would have to confront it. The painful past, the misunderstandings, the guilt, the unbearable loss. But he would do it for the sake of this child who alone was innocent in this matter, who had been made the victim of the crimes of others.
I loved your mother more than life itself. I know she loved me. We pledged ourselves to one another in secret at first and promised to be married. I knew her father would have no objection, neither would Fingor, or so I believed. I was the third heir after him and Galad, and was free to choose my own wife. Even so, Ethera was the daughter of Count Byrand of Gilreth. It was a very good match for the politicians also. It is impossible to tell you how happy we were together. Even when I brought her to Belruth for the formal betrothal and Fingor's shadow fell over us, we were laughing together at his clumsy attentions. Nothing could touch us or mar our happiness. We went out into the hills or explored the ruins together. There was not a day that went by without it being a celebration of our love, the joy of it. I did not see it coming. I could not have imagined it possible. Fingor fixed his greedy eyes on her, wanted her, schemed to steal her away from me. She would not have him, of course, but she became frightened of his temper, his declarations of passion. They started their games, their plots. Behind my back they discussed their options, the Count and the King, with that old crow Talon in attendance. They would give her to Fingor to replace his dead wife, even though he had an heir in Lucane, and I would be left with nothing. She was called in and confronted with it. They argued, they threatened, they pleaded. I could see the effects it had on her, though I knew nothing of what they were doing. She was distracted, tearful, pale. I could get no answers from her. Then, at last, it was made public. Fingor and Ethera were betrothed. I could not believe it. I felt betrayed, humiliated, heartbroken. When I met with her in secret, she told me everything. I had a terrible argument with Fingor and said things to him that drove him into a fantastic rage. If Galad had not intervened, we would have come to blows. In the end, I had to accept it. There was nothing to be done. She was lost to me, yet I could not give her up. I went to meet with her at night, in her bedchamber. We wept together, holding each other, talking away the night, always fearful of discovery. I begged her to come away with me. We could flee far away from Nuria and the king, start a new life in some foreign land. But she would not. She feared them too much, what they would do to her, to us. Then the cursed hour arrived, the night of my supposed crime. It was the evening before her union with Fingor would be formalized. I could not go to her. We had said our farewells, and I was in the deepest despair. Somehow the wolf had discovered that we were meeting in secret. He planned to break in on us, to trap me in her bedchamber, to have me up before the Truth Council. He knew she would not give me up, even if he married her. Her heart would always be mine. So he set his trap with murder in his mind. For when he saw a figure in the dark outside her door, his anger boiled over, and he stuck a knife in the man's back. It so turned out that it wasn't his younger brother Rune bleeding to death on the stone floor as he had hoped, but Galad, come to warn me of his treacherous scheme. What was to be done? The king had committed murder, but he had reason to be jealous after all, and they would not risk the stability of their precious kingdom. So they did what they do best, kept up the pretense of Fingor's virtue, and found someone to take the blame. I was the one who struck down my brother when he confronted me with my sins. I was the kinslayer, the vile fiend who would dishonor my king and kill to hide my guilt. Oh, they were clever, making much noise and appearing to be astonished and dismayed. I do not know what dirty bargains were struck to band them together in it, but once they committed to the first untruth, there was no turning back. No doubt they felt it was better to sacrifice the unknown younger prince, who had already cursed them to their faces, than the king whose part they had taken all along. They had me locked away, who was innocent of any crime but undying devotion to your mother. They started their mock trial, where not one lie was uncovered before the so-called Council of Truth, not even Ethera's pathetic claim that I was with her when Galad had been killed, and could therefore not have done the deed myself. They pounced on that like hungry wolves, claiming it proved my guilt, since there was a witness to place me at the scene. I believed that she had betrayed me, whether out of fear or pressure. I was afraid myself, hurt, confused. She gave them the testimony that they needed to condemn me. She was married to Fingor, that smug liar who gloated over my pain and despair. They pointed their fingers at me, heaped on me the guilt of what they had done, and she stood among them, unwilling or unable to aid me. I cursed them all then, who would see me destroyed and broken, who would trample the truth and uphold falsehood for their gain. They were monsters in my eyes, evil and cruel, and I would never forgive them.
He fell silent for a few moments, the scene of those terrible days unfolding before his mind's eye. Now that he was free of the stranglehold of spite and bitterness, his error seemed so clear to him. It was impossible to shape the sentiments of that dark time into words, to make someone else understand the utter desolation that motivated his actions and thoughts. He had not been sane, not in all these cycles of exile and misery. When he continued, his voice broke, betraying something of the hopelessness he carried still.
They put me out, as you know, to become a wanderer. Merciful, some called them. My name, my future, my happiness, even the memory of me they had tainted, marred, turned to bywords and slur. None of it I can ever undo. Faced with that, I turned into the animal you came to know. I have committed many atrocities in my time, terrible things that would make you despise me as I now despise myself. But the worst of all was the blame I heaped on Aethera. The wicked words I spoke to her in parting, the curses I breathed at her for cycles after. I do not know how to live with those things now.
The boy was breathing quietly beside him. The words lay between them, too stark and heavy not to warrant a reaction. Rune waited a few moments longer and then asked,
Are you asleep?
There was still no verbal response, but the silent form stirred itself at last. Gareth rolled over to put his head on the man's chest. Soon, soaking through his shirt, Rune felt the damp of his tears. A wall broke inside him. He was back in Belruth, weeping with the mother of this child, for the cruelty of life and the anguish of forced separation. How greed and covetousness had brought him low. How he had fallen from grace into debauchery and degradation. He had stooped to every vile deed of which they had accused him. He had not been able to hold on to one thing of value. Till now, he thought. Till now. He had been allowed to restore something of his dream, a fragment that would not perish, and in restoring it he had restored his own worth. Gradually the shuddering in the boy's shoulders subsided. Rune put an arm around him. He brought up his sleeve to his own eyes before speaking.
Perhaps you see now why I could not think of letting you go. The memory of your mother would not allow it, even if you were the son of my brother. But I will say something more, and this is the truth. If you were not her son at all, or mine, I would have fetched you from there, just for who you are to me.